The 1950s revolutionized the Western with explosive color that changed cinema forever. Did you know that Technicolor film required 3 times more lighting than black and white? Studios gambled millions on these vivid frontier epics that transformed how we see the American West. Let's dive into the 21 greatest Technicolor Westerns from Hollywood's golden decade. Shane, 1953. George Stevens delivered the most visually arresting Western ever filmed, shooting for 13 months just to capture Wyoming's Grand Tetons in perfect seasonal light. This tale of a mysterious gunfighter defending homesteaders against cattle barons wasn't just pretty, it was revolutionary. The film's violence was shockingly realistic, with amplified gunshot sounds that made audiences jump out of their seats. Stevens insisted on shooting in Technicolor 3-strip, even though the process was nearly obsolete, because he wanted that specific rich saturation for his landscapes. The extra work paid off. Critics initially dismissed it as too pretty, but audiences were mesmerized by Jack Palance's chilling villain, who reportedly terrified children in test screenings so badly that several scenes were cut. Alan Ladd, who stood just 5 feet 6 inches, performed his scenes on platforms and trenches to appear taller than his co-stars. The film's legendary final scene, with Shane riding away as young Brandon DeWild cries, "Shane, come back!" Zrania was almost completely reshot because Stevens thought the mountains didn't look majestic enough in the first take. Talk about perfectionism paying off. The Searchers, 1956. John Ford's obsession with Monument Valley reached its peak with this psychological masterpiece, a film that used Technicolor not just for beauty, but to explore a man's twisted soul. John Wayne's Ethan Edwards, consumed by hatred and searching for his kidnapped niece, represents Ford's darkest vision of the American frontier. Ford insisted on VistaVision widescreen format combined with Technicolor to capture the vastness of the landscape that reflected Edwards's isolation. The famous doorway shots that bookend the film weren't just visual poetry, they were deliberate symbols of civilization that Edwards could never fully enter. Wayne later confessed he was terrified of playing such a complex racist character, but Ford pushed him relentlessly. The result? Wayne's finest performance ever. Famously, when Natalie Wood was cast as the older version of the kidnapped niece, Ford told her, "I don't want any of your modern method bull in my picture." The film was initially a commercial disappointment, but is now considered among the greatest films ever made. Martin Scorsese claims he's watched it over 50 times, studying how Ford used color to tell his story. High Noon, 1952. Fred Zinnemann's real-time Western thriller wasn't just a masterpiece of tension. It was a daring political statement filmed during the Hollywood blacklist era. Despite its muted Technicolor palette that enhanced the dusty isolation of Marshall Kane's abandoned town, the film's production was wildly troubled. Star Gary Cooper was in excruciating pain throughout filming due to a back injury and ulcers, but refused medication so his discomfort would enhance his performance. The film's screenwriter, Carl Foreman, was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee during production and subsequently blacklisted. John Wayne later called High Noon the most un-American thing I've ever seen, and actively campaigned against it at the Academy Awards. The iconic theme song, "Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darlin'," was written in just 4 hours, and initially rejected by the studio as too downbeat. It went on to become the first movie theme to hit #1 on the Billboard charts. The film's Technicolor cinematography used increasingly stark lighting as noon approached, creating a visual countdown that matched the story's mounting tension. Modern directors from Spielberg to Tarantino have cited its real-time structure as revolutionary. Rio Bravo, 1959. Howard Hawks made this vibrant Technicolor masterpiece as a direct rebuke to High Noon, believing a real hero would never ask for help. The result? A Western so influential that John Carpenter remade it twice. Filming in old Tucson studios during a record heat wave, the cast sweltered under the intense lights required for Technicolor filming. The production nearly derailed when Dean Martin arrived, drunk on set, after losing his Vegas singing gig. Hawks threatened to fire him, but John Wayne personally vouched for Martin and helped him stay sober throughout filming. Their on-screen friendship became so genuine that Wayne considered it his favorite film. Hawks insisted on shooting night scenes during actual night hours, unusual for the time, to capture authentic color tones. The director's perfectionism extended to Angie Dickinson's costumes, which went through 15 different shade variations to find the perfect feathers red that would pop against the adobe walls. The film bombed critically, but became a massive commercial hit, inspiring countless directors with its relaxed pacing and naturalistic dialogue. Quentin Tarantino watches it before starting any new film project, calling it comfort food cinema at its finest. Bend of the River, 1952. Anthony Mann transformed James Stewart's wholesome image forever with this psychologically complex Technicolor Western shot in the breathtaking Columbia River Gorge. Stewart plays a reformed outlaw guiding settlers whose moral code is tested when food supplies for starving homesteaders are threatened by gold rush profiteers. Mann insisted on shooting treacherous mountain scenes at actual high elevations, leading to several near-fatal accidents. During one scene, Stewart's horse slipped on a narrow trail with a 500-foot drop below. Only Stewart's quick reflexes saved both their lives. The studio begged Mann to use rear projection for these scenes, but he refused, believing Technicolor required authentic locations. The film's vivid red blood was shocking to 1950s audiences, who weren't accustomed to seeing violence in such vibrant color. Universal Studios initially rejected the film as too bleak, until Mann convinced them that Technicolor would make the Oregon landscape into a character itself. Rock Hudson, then an unknown, was cast against type as a villain and hated his performance so much he tried to buy back the footage. This film established the Stewart-Mann Western collaboration that would revolutionize the genre by bringing psychological complexity to color westerns. Johnny Guitar, 1954. Nicholas Ray's fever dream western remains the most deliriously colorful entry in the genre, a film where Technicolor becomes expressionistic emotion. Joan Crawford's Vienna, dressed in vivid black and fire engine red, faces off against Mercedes McCambridge's Emma in cinema's most intense female Western rivalry. The psychosexual overtones were so bold that the film was banned in several southern states. Behind the scenes, Crawford and McCambridge's mutual hatred was so intense that Crawford allegedly threw McCambridge's costumes into the highway outside the set. Ray used this real tension to fuel their on-screen confrontations. The director deliberately chose clashing Technicolor hues to create visual discord, matching the story's psychological intensity. Republic Pictures, usually known for budget westerns, spent lavishly on the Technicolor process specifically for this film, believing it would elevate their studio's reputation. Instead, American critics savaged it as garish and hysterical. Meanwhile, French critics declared it a masterpiece, with François Truffaut calling it the beauty and the beast of westerns. The film's influence is immeasurable. Everything from Tarantino's dialogue to the costume design in Mad Max. Fury Road owes a debt to this wild Technicolor fever dream. The Man from Laramie, 1955. Anthony Mann's psychological western, his final collaboration with James Stewart, pushed Technicolor and CinemaScope to their limits, creating widescreen vistas where tiny human figures struggle against both landscape and their own darkest impulses. Stewart plays a man seeking revenge for his brother's death, confronting a ranching family torn apart by their own violent tendencies. The film's most shocking scene, where Stewart's character has his hand shot through and is dragged through a fire, was filmed in a single take because Stewart refused a double and couldn't repeat the physically grueling sequence. The moment was so disturbing that British censors cut it entirely. Mann deliberately chose the harshest, most unforgiving New Mexico locations, where the crew battled sandstorms that damaged the delicate Technicolor cameras. Studio executives complained that Mann's vision was too artsy for a Western, particularly his insistence on using Technicolor for psychological effect rather than mere visual spectacle. The famous scene where Stewart rides a bucking horse wasn't scripted. The animal genuinely went wild, and Mann kept the cameras rolling as Stewart narrowly avoided serious injury. Scorsese considers the film's use of widescreen composition the most influential of any 1950s film, saying, "Man understood that CinemaScope wasn't about getting more people in the frame. It was about the negative space around them." The Big Country, 1958. William Wyler's epic Technicolor Western wasn't just big in title. It featured the most ambitious widescreen color photography ever attempted, with panoramic vistas that made the American West look like a massive oil painting come to life. The story of an Eastern sea captain thrust into a Western range war became Wyler's personal statement on masculinity and violence. The famous fistfight between Gregory Peck and Charlton Heston took 5 nights to film and left both actors seriously injured. Peck, also the producer, battled constantly with Wyler over the film's length, with Wyler sarcastically suggesting they rename it The Big, Big, Big Country. When composer Jerome Moross delivered his now iconic score, Wyler initially rejected it as too big, only keeping it after preview audiences cheered during the opening credits. President Eisenhower loved the film so much he screened it at the White House 4 times and called it the best movie ever made. The Technicolor process struggled with the film's massive widescreen format, requiring special lenses and double the normal lighting equipment. The sheer scale of production nearly bankrupted Peck's production company, but the film's enduring visual power has influenced everything from Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns to HBO's Westworld, Winchester's 73, 1950. Anthony Mann's innovative Technicolor Western follows a prized rifle as it passes through multiple owners, creating a new template for the genre. The film's revolutionary, deep focus, Technicolor photography allowed viewers to see both foreground and background in sharp detail, making the violence more immediate and shocking than anything audiences had experienced. James Stewart took no salary for this film, instead negotiating for 50% of profits, a move that eventually earned him $600,000 and changed Hollywood pay structures forever. The studio initially balked at casting Stewart, believing he lacked the hardness for a Western. Mann famously told Universal, "I'm going to show you a side of Stewart you've never seen, a dark, vengeful side." The production employed real trick shot artists who could hit a dime tossed in the air from 30 paces, though ironically, Stewart's character, supposedly the best marksman in the West, was played by an actor who struggled with basic shooting. The Technicolor process was so demanding that filming the campfire scenes required special chemical additives to make the flames photograph blue instead of their natural orange. Just one example of how Technicolor actually altered reality to create its distinctive look. 310. To Yuma, 1957. Delmer Daves created the most visually stark Technicolor Western of the decade, using high-contrast shadows and blinding white skies to enhance the psychological duel between a desperate rancher and the charismatic outlaw he's escorting to prison. The film's Technicolor cinematography deliberately veered away from the lush look typical of the process, instead creating a harsh, almost monochromatic feel that enhanced the story's moral dilemmas. Van Heflin and Glenn Ford's on-screen chemistry came from genuine tension. Ford, usually cast as heroes, found playing the villain so disturbing that he suffered insomnia throughout the shoot. Columbia Pictures initially rejected the screenplay as too talky, but Daves insisted the verbal sparring was more suspenseful than gunplay. He was right. The film's famous clock sequence, where each tick ratchets tension, inspired similar scenes in High Noon and Once Upon a Time in the West. Despite critical acclaim, the film struggled at the box office because Columbia paired it with a beach party movie, creating possibly the worst double feature in history. Today, the film is studied by directors like Christopher Nolan for its masterful building of suspense, through subtle color shifts rather than musical cues. Broken Arrow, 1950. Delmer Daves shattered Hollywood stereotypes with this groundbreaking Technicolor Western, the first major film to portray Native Americans sympathetically. Shot in vibrant Arizona locations, the film's use of color wasn't just aesthetic, it was political, showing Apache culture with dignity and visual splendor previously denied to indigenous characters. James Stewart still rebuilding his career after World War II, fought for the controversial project despite warnings it would damage his image. When real Apache consultants objected to inaccuracies in the script, Stewart personally ensured many changes were made, unheard of for 1950s Hollywood. The authentic color presentation of Apache ceremonies proved so influential that subsequent films copied its palette exactly. The U.S. government officially commended the production for advancing cultural understanding, while simultaneously, Southern states banned the film for depicting interracial romance. Cinematographer Ernest Palmer developed special Technicolor lighting techniques to ensure that the skin tones of white and indigenous actors were captured with equal care and dignity. A technical innovation with profound social implications. Modern indigenous filmmakers still cite it as the first Hollywood Western that attempted to see through native eyes, rather than just appropriate their imagery. Rancho Notorious, 1952. Fritz Lang, the German expressionist master, brought his unique visual sensibility to this fever dream Western starring Marlene Dietrich as the owner of an outlaw hideaway. The film's Technicolor palette is deliberately artificial and stylized. Lang wanted the colors to express emotional states, rather than reality, creating a Western unlike any other of its era. RKO studio executives were so baffled by Lang's color choices, particularly his insistence on purple shadows and green-tinted interiors, that they tried to fire him midway through production. Arthur Kennedy, playing a man obsessed with finding his fiancée's killer, became so immersed in the role that he suffered a nervous breakdown during filming and disappeared from the set for 3 days. The film's original title, Chuck-a-Luck, was changed after preview audiences laughed at it, though the strange ballad about hate, murder, and revenge remained. Dietrich, at 50, insisted on performing her own stunts, including a dangerous fall from a balcony that her younger double refused to attempt. The film's expressionistic Technicolor influenced generations of filmmakers. Kenneth Anger's experimental films, David Lynch's Blue Velvet, and Nicholas Winding Refn's neon-soaked thrillers all owe a debt to Lang's color experiments in this bizarre, beautiful Western. Vera Cruz, 1954. Robert Aldrich's cynical, sun-scorched Western revolutionized the genre with its amoral protagonists and stunning Mexican locations captured in vibrant Superscope Technicolor. The pairing of Gary Cooper's aging gunfighter with Burt Lancaster's grinning mercenary created an unforgettable study in contrasts against the blindingly bright colonial architecture of Vera Cruz. The production was plagued with disasters. Real revolutions threatened the crew. Cooper was badly injured when a bridge explosion used excessive dynamite, and Lancaster nearly died from dysentery but refused to halt filming. Aldrich deliberately pushed Technicolor's capabilities by shooting in harsh midday sun when other directors avoided it, creating a bleached, violent world that influenced everything from The Wild Bunch to Breaking Bad. Mexican officials initially welcomed the production, but became increasingly concerned about the film's portrayal of their history. Aldrich responded by hiring hundreds of local extras and showcasing authentic locations never before seen in American cinema. The film's moral ambiguity and explosive violence shocked 1950s audiences. One Texas theater owner reportedly stopped the film midway through and refunded tickets, declaring it not a proper Western. Its influence on later films is incalculable. Sergio Leone admitted that the entire spaghetti Western genre grew from Vera Cruz's cynical soil. Hondo, 1953. John Ford produced this stunning Technicolor showcase for John Wayne, filmed in Mexico's Chihuahuan desert, using the new 3D process combined with Technicolor for unprecedented visual depth. Wayne plays a half-Indian scout who protects a woman and her son living in Apache territory, creating one of his most nuanced characterizations. The production pioneered a revolutionary Technicolor 3D camera system that nearly bankrupted Warner Brothers, requiring custom lenses that kept breaking in the desert heat. James Edward Grant's screenplay was based on a Louis L'Amour story, but the author was so impressed by the film's expansion of his material that he novelized the movie script, creating the rare case of a book based on a film based on a short story by the same author. Wayne performed a dangerous stunt where he was dragged through water by a horse that went wrong, leaving him with injuries that troubled him for years. Director John Farrow was fired midway through production for fighting with Wayne, with John Ford stepping in to direct several scenes, uncredited. Despite the troubled shoot, the film's vibrant Technicolor photography of Apache culture was so authentic that tribal leaders presented Wayne with ceremonial gifts at the premiere. The film's influence extended beyond cinema. It literally changed Western literature, as Lamour adopted the film's richer characterization approach for his subsequent 100-plus novels. Ride Lonesome, 1959. Bud Boedischer's taut, minimalist Western makes extraordinary use of Technicolor cinemascope, with compositions so precise that every cactus and cloud seems deliberately placed. Randolph Scott plays a bounty hunter with a secret agenda, traversing a hostile landscape with a captive outlaw and unlikely companions. The entire film was shot in just 12 days in California's Alabama hills, with cinematographer Charles Lawton Jr. developing a special technique for Technicolor filters that enhanced the stark beauty of the rock formations. When Columbia executives complained about the accelerated schedule, Boedischer bet the studio head $10,000 that he could complete the film on time and under budget. He won the bet. Scott, nearing the end of his career, performed his own dangerous stunt work despite being in his 60s, including a scene where he's dragged behind a horse that went wrong, resulting in 3 broken ribs. The film's most striking visual, a burning hanging tree against a sunset, required specially designed pyrotechnics that would photograph correctly in Technicolor without appearing orange. This image became so iconic that Sam Peckinpah directly homaged it in The Wild Bunch, and the Coen brothers referenced it in True Grit. Martin Scorsese calls it the most perfect 73 minutes in Western cinema. Gunfight at the OK Corral, 1957. John Sturges turned the legendary 30-second shootout into a Technicolor spectacle starring Burt Lancaster as Wyatt Earp and Kirk Douglas as Doc Holliday. The director insisted on shooting on location in Arizona to capture authentic colors of the region, rejecting studio sets entirely, a revolutionary approach for a major Technicolor production of the era. The climactic gunfight scene took 8 days to film and used over 5,000 blank cartridges. Sturges meticulously researched the actual historical event, but admitted freely changing details for dramatic effect, saying, "I'm making a movie, not a document." When real-life Tombstone citizens complained about historical inaccuracies, Sturges famously replied, "History remembers what it wants to, and so do I." The Technicolor cinematography by Charles Lang Jr. used a revolutionary day-for-night filming technique that allowed authentic location shooting while creating the illusion of nighttime scenes, all without losing the vibrant color palette the studio demanded. The film's commercial success established the adult Western as viable, proving audiences would embrace morally complex characters in historically based narratives. Its visual language, particularly the staging of the final shootout, has been copied in virtually every subsequent telling of the Wyatt Earp story. The Naked Spur, 1953. Anthony Mann's third Technicolor Western with James Stewart takes place almost entirely outdoors, using Colorado's majestic landscapes as both stunning backdrop and metaphor for the character's moral wilderness. Stewart plays a bounty hunter pursuing a murderer played by Robert Ryan, with their psychological battle intensified by the vivid natural colors surrounding them. The film's difficult mountain locations nearly proved fatal several times. During one scene, a flash flood swept through the set, destroying equipment and nearly drowning Janet Leigh. Mann refused to use stunt doubles for dangerous river crossings, leading to Stewart contracting a severe respiratory infection that delayed production for a week. The director's insistence on authentic locations for Technicolor realism nearly bankrupted the production. Despite critical acclaim, MGM initially considered the film too bleak for mass audiences and almost released it as a B-picture with minimal promotion. Its visceral violence, particularly a scene where Stewart is stabbed with a fishing spear, shocked 1950s audiences used to more sanitized westerns. The film's innovative use of Technicolor for psychological effect, with landscape colors shifting to match emotional states, influenced filmmakers from Kurosawa to Terrence Malick, who specifically cited the film's visual strategy in creating Days of Heaven. Garden of Evil, 1954. Henry Hathaway's underappreciated Technicolor gem stars Gary Cooper, Richard Widmark, and Susan Hayward in a tale of greed and redemption set against some of the most spectacular Mexican locations ever captured on film. 20th Century Fox spared no expense, shipping the entire Technicolor camera setup to remote Oaxacan mountains never before filmed by Hollywood. The production faced extraordinary challenges. Earthquakes damaged equipment. Local superstitions about the cursed filming locations led to crew desertions, and Hayward suffered a scorpion bite that nearly halted production. Fox executives were horrified by the daily footage costs, but couldn't argue with the results. The film's saturated colors and vertiginous mountain photography still astonish viewers today. Bernard Herrmann's score, one of his few for westerns, perfectly complements the otherworldly landscape. Widmark later revealed that Cooper was seriously ill during filming, the undiagnosed cancer that would eventually kill him, yet performed his own stunts, including a dangerous horseback ride along a narrow mountain trail. The film's influence is seen in everything from The Treasure of the Sierra Madre to There Will Be Blood, with Paul Thomas Anderson specifically citing its use of landscape as character. Despite initial commercial disappointment, cinematographers regularly rank it among the most beautifully shot westerns ever made. The Last Hunt, 1956. Richard Brooks crafted this environmentally conscious western about the slaughter of buffalo herds, shocking audiences with Technicolor footage of actual buffalo kills filmed during a government culling operation. Robert Taylor and Stuart Granger play hunters with opposing views on the mass extermination, creating a morally complex narrative that was decades ahead of its time. MGM received thousands of angry letters about the real animal deaths shown in the film, though Brooks defended the footage as necessary to show the true horror of the buffalo slaughter. The studio nearly shelved the film, fearing backlash, until John Ford personally intervened, calling it the most honest western I've ever seen. The production's Technicolor cameras captured the brutal South Dakota winter, with temperatures reaching -20 degrees Fahrenheit during filming. The scene where Taylor's character kills a white buffalo required a real albino bison worth $10,000, though the actual shooting was simulated. Native American actors in the film protested several scenes they considered disrespectful, leading to rare script changes accommodating their concerns, a virtually unprecedented occurrence in 1950s Hollywood. Debbie Reynolds called it the most disturbing film I've ever seen, and its unflinching ecological message makes it perhaps the first environmental western, influencing films like Dances with Wolves decades later. Warlock, 1959. Edward Dmytryk's psychologically complex western uses Technicolor to create a world where moral boundaries are as blurred as the film's sometimes hallucinatory visuals. Henry Fonda plays a celebrity gunfighter hired to clean up a lawless town, with Richard Widmark as a reformed outlaw who becomes his unlikely opponent. The film's homoerotic subtext between Fonda and Anthony Quinn's characters was so obvious that studio executives demanded cuts, which Dmytryk refused, cleverly arguing that Technicolor processing had already been completed and changes would be prohibitively expensive. The production used revolutionary color timing techniques to give different sections of the town distinct color temperatures, visually representing the community's divided loyalties. Quinn's preparation for his role included living with a disabled man for weeks to authentically portray his character's limp, a level of method acting commitment unusual for westerns of the era. When conservative groups attacked the film for its moral ambiguity, Dmytryk, himself a victim of the Hollywood blacklist, publicly defended the film's complexity as reflecting real American values rather than mythological ones. The film's influence on revisionist westerns is immeasurable. Without Warlock, There would be no Unforgiven or No Country for Old Men. Sam Peckinpah called it the first modern Western and borrowed heavily from its complex character dynamics for his own groundbreaking films. Which Technicolor Western deserves the top spot on this list? Let me know in the comments below if you think I've ranked them correctly or missed any classics. Did Hollywood's obsession with Technicolor actually improve these Westerns? Or would some have been more powerful in stark black and white? This debate has divided film scholars for decades. Where do you stand? Hit subscribe for more cinematic deep dives, and don't forget to ring that notification bell.